All right, so I am back with another Power Automate flow that I want to show you. It's a purchase request form that will submit emails and approval requests to managers and different parties. This is a great way to have someone external or internal to the company make a request and go through an approval process, in an automatic fashion. All right, so this starts by actually creating a form in Microsoft Forms. So I've created a purchase request form. It's a hardware and software. This is like an advanced form, but obviously you can make it more simplified. So as you go through, there's hardware and software. Different accessories. If it's hardware, where are we shipping it to? Is there a billing code that's going to be associated to this purchase? Is there any licensing that's going to be involved? They like to tick off many boxes, including hardware and software at the same time. They don't want to fill out the form twice. So we just include all of that together. Now, the first thing you really need to do is once you create this form, you want to go over to collect responses to the right. And you'll see in here, now there's a couple other ways to get this URL, but you'll see in here ID equal, and this is the form ID that we're going to copy. And then I head over and I create a flow with that copied text. The connector I use is when a new response is submitted, that is the trigger. The trigger is what kicks off the flow and gets it running. So here is the form ID pasted right in. Now there's an action, another connector is still in Microsoft Forms connector, and it just gets the response details of what was just kicked off. So the trigger initiates the flow, and then the first action is we're going to grab all the details from the response. Now, as you can see, if you click on response ID, there's a generated dynamic content variable that you can just click on and use. With this purchase request form that we have built, there is a slightly more advanced approval process. So the first thing I do is I use a connector to get the user's profile. And I do that by pulling in the email of, now this is as you can see here, it says get response details. This is all the data that we pulled in from the connector above with that action. And I go down, grab the responder's email, and I use that as the UPN to grab the requester's profile. So now I get the requester's manager using this data. Now there's a conditional portion to this where I want to know if they're like the president, CEO, director, officer, anything like that. They're not going to really want to be bothered with a whole approval process. They're so important they don't need to have anything approved by a manager, right? Especially the CEO. First, I'll start with if they are a CEO or officer or so on and so forth. We'll head over to the green section where it says if yes. We'll go in here and we're going to do another conditional inside of this green box. As you can see, there's like a context window that we're within. Now, the first condition we're going to have is check if the request type is software. Remember how this purchase request had a hardware and software option. The reason for that is different groups of people in this company approve and purchase hardware versus the people that approve and purchase the software. We differentiate between those two by having that conditional logic right here. So as we come down, we're going to see check if the request is a software. If it is, we're going to pull it into the conditional of yes in this little subtask here, and we're going to create a planner task. We're going to assign it to the information technology group because they're going to be in charge of the software requests. We're going to pull in the information about the user from the get requests profile because I want the display name. I don't want just the email. We're also going to have the software licensing details from the actual request itself, software licensing. You can put it into different buckets. I put it into request has been submitted bucket. Now, you can't actually add details, at least not at this time, to this task during the creation of the planner task. So now you have to actually go back to the task and update it. So you pull in the task ID. This is automatically generated when you do the create task. It stays in this context and you still have that. So you grab the ID of this task that you just created and you're going to add the description. So in here we add what software licensing, is there any special instructions, and when was this actually submitted? Now the reason for that is you may have an approval process before that. And if there is an approval process before that, the time that the form was submitted may be different than the time that it was actually approved. It may take a week for someone to click the button to approve. So you may want the actual initial submission time. And if it's not software, what we'll do is we'll pull it in. So I just have a group ID here. If you're wondering what that is, it's just the group ID itself. I'll pull it into the purchasing planner and I'll add the display name. And because it's not software, I'm going to pull in the hardware. Now in this planner group, there is a bucket for IT. Because it's still an IT purchase request, I have it in the IT bucket. They may have other purchase requests, so they might have different buckets. You know, maybe there's a purchase request for office equipment. So we have different buckets for different categories. And again, I go in and I update the details with what hardware, is there any special instructions, if there's a billing code, and is there any additional shipping information? Where are we shipping this hardware to? If it is not a CEO or director or blah, 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 I will collapse that. You can collapse these and expand them. If it is not, then what we need to do is we need to submit an approval process. So as you can see here, submit approval to the requester's manager. Now this assumes that the manager even exists. If the manager doesn't exist, you actually have to assign it to somebody else. But everyone at this company has a manager assigned in the directory system. And so this pulls that information from the connector, get requester's manager. So the manager is going to receive an email and also a Teams message about this request. And they can either click approve or deny, and they can even make comments if needed. And as you can see, we just pull in the same variable from the form submission. Here we don't actually specify if it's software or hardware, we just include everything. And when you do it like this, what ends up happening is you'll see it in brackets, and it'll be an array of items in quotation marks. Now you could probably reformat this to look nicer, but it's really not necessary. Now once you submit the approval, you have to wait and see if it's approved. So you say check if request is approved by manager is the outcome of the approval. As you can see, this color looks like the approval color, right? You just pull this information from the dynamic content if you ever need to. As you can see here, submit approval to the requester's manager. Here's all the details you can grab. I'm grabbing the outcome, and if it's approved, then we can say, yes, we're ready to make the purchase. Now it's just the same as the one I just showed you, where we're going to create a task. It's already been approved by the approval process. So once it shows up in this planner task, the person that's in charge of these planner tasks is going to know, okay, this has been approved for purchase. I'm going to go ahead and just make the purchase. I have all the details I need. Now, we do something a little different here because we want to add in the information about the approval. So we grab the approval response. Now there could be more than one approval response. Depending on how you set up the approval, you could have everyone must approve, or you could have the first one to approve. And so there could be more than one, which is why it gets put into this loop right here, the apply to each loop. And this automatically gets generated when you try and utilize the response's dynamic content. So here we're going to update the task details, and we're actually going to include this time, a little bit different, who it actually approved, and if they had any comments during the approval process, what does it say? Now, we also have a post message to chat or channel, and we post it to our information technology channel. This is for all requests. We don't really differentiate between software and hardware in this part, and we can always just like quickly glance at this. It's kind of nice. It's really not necessary because all the purchase requests actually get put into a spreadsheet that you can always look at later on. Every single form in Microsoft Office Forms has its own spreadsheet for if we're requesting any of these specific software licensing plans, then we actually reach out to a company that is the vendor for these licenses, and we just send them an email using the email connector. So this vendor receives the email, they know it's an automated email, they see what licensing is required, what Microsoft licensing, and then they assign it to the user. Now, during this approval process, right here, submit approval to the requester's manager, the flow actually gets paused. And you can see this is a running flow. It's currently waiting, and it's waiting right here, submit approval to the requester's manager. It will keep running for, I believe, 30 days. And I don't know if there's a way to change that. So if they don't answer this within the 30 days, eventually the flow gets shut down, with the running instance of that flow. The whole approval process will have to be restarted manually. And this is just one really interesting way to work with Power Automate. You can do so many different things with Power Automate. One of my favorite things to do is create a form so someone could fill out the data and have it all automated, top to bottom, through a system of connections and Have each department that needs whatever piece of information is required for them to function, get that piece of information from this form request. It's really great for companies to have this sort of automation on their back end. And these flows really are not very difficult to set up. I hope you're enjoying this Power Automate series. I would love for you to leave a comment and tell me anything else you'd like to learn about, or if you have any comments or suggestions on how I can make or improve these videos.